Hello there, I'm Noel Hacegaba, Chief Operating Officer at the Port of Long Beach. Welcome to Supply Chain Insight, where we explore the latest trends, issues, and news in the supply chain with top industry leaders, experts, and trendsetters. Our objective is to bring you the insight you need to help you keep your cargo moving. Today's executives expect a lot from their supply chains: efficiency, velocity, flexibility, cost management, and operational excellence. Supply Chain Insight brings a supply chain to you, one segment at a time, to explore new approaches and innovative solutions that will help you and the Port of Long Beach deliver greater value to our customers and partners. In today's episode, we will hear from two of the industry's most influential voices, Chris Brooks and Mark Szakonyi. Chris Brooks is the Executive Director of the Journal of Commerce and JOC Events, and Mark is the S&P Director and JOC Executive Editor for S&P Global Market Intelligence. Both of these gentlemen are longtime journalists with the Journal of Commerce and also part of the team that for the past 24 years has produced the maritime industry's flagship conference, TPM. Chris, Mark, welcome to Supply Chain Insight. I am thrilled to have you both on today's program for a recap of TPM24, which took place right here in Long Beach just a few weeks ago. And first of all, congratulations to you and your team for producing another exceptional TPM. I don't know how you guys do it, but you continue to raise the bar year after year, and TPM24 was certainly no exception. And here in Long Beach, we were proud to be the host partner and glad that the president of our Harbor Commission, Bobby O'Vera Jr., was able to welcome the attendees to Long Beach. Now, before we get to the content, Chris, why don't you give our audience a rundown of TPM24 by the numbers?
Sure, Noel. Thank you, and thrilled to be here with you, and really appreciate the opportunity. As you said, we were super excited about TPM24 and what we were able to bring to this industry and to Long Beach. So what did TPM24 entail this year? Just shy of 4,050 attendees across every spectrum of the supply chain, representing nearly 50 countries and every continent. So some of those are records. Many of them are records. Really proud about our global footprint and how we've been able to expand TPM over the years. You mentioned our relationship with Long Beach, and huge gratitude to the port for its support over all but, I believe, 2 TPMs in the 24-year history. So Long Beach, as our host sponsor, is one of nearly 110 partners, again, representing all segments of the supply chain. Many of them exhibiting throughout the Long Beach Convention Center, the downtown hotels, and throughout the area. We were also proud to be able to bring 15 media outlets to TPM24, including some of the biggest names in mass media, the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, Reuters News, Bloomberg among them, and of course then numerous B2B outlets covering container shipping and the global containerized supply chain.
That's fantastic, Chris. Again, congratulations to you and the team for raising the bar year after year. In fact, one of the media outlets called TPM the Davos of Shipping. It really is a who's who. And the atmosphere is truly electric when you walk the halls and make your way from the exhibit hall to the panel rooms. It really was electric. So congrats again on these new records and milestones. And I can tell you that the port and the city of Long Beach truly appreciate having this flagship conference in our city. It literally draws tens of thousands of people to our city. So thanks again for that. Now, you've come a long way since the first TPM 24 years ago. Remind us how many people were at that very first TPM.
Well, it has come a long way, and I can't attest to this in person because the TPM1 in 2021. We've been fortunate because the TPM 24 aligns not only with the addition of TPM, but also the year in which it runs. But TPM 1 had approximately 150 attendees, It was staged at LAX airport, I believe at the Marriott out at the airport in LA. So yeah, very different world from where we are today.
It's amazing, Chris. So from 150 to you're pushing 4,000. I mean, really, again, it has truly blossomed and evolved. In addition to growing your attendance, you've also expanded your program offerings. For example, at TPM24, you had TPM Cold Chain, TPM Tech, TPM Academy. Chris, did you ever imagine that TPM would grow to this level, or was that always part of the plan?
I don't know if, it's a great question. I don't know if anyone can truly envision what TPM has become. TPM was born out of the Journal of Commerce editorial content. We're a group of content-oriented individuals delivering market intelligence and analysis that hopefully helps people dealing with daily supply chain challenges. Hopefully helps them do their jobs a little bit better or understand the factors that they're dealing with in the supply chain. So really, TPM was born as another content channel out of the Journal of Commerce editorial product. So to the extent to envision how it's grown, we're journalists who don't necessarily have massive business minds. So what we're trying to do is deliver honest, intelligent journalism, and that resonates with this market. We talked about TPM Academy and TPM Tech and TPM Cold Chain. We'll talk a little bit more about those initiatives a little bit later in the episode. We haven't touched on some of the ancillary events going on at TPM. The TPM Golf Open at Pelican Hill, which attracts more than 100 golfers on Sunday afternoon. The regatta held out in the breakwaters of Long Beach on Sunday afternoon. We have 10 yachts in a true yacht race. So there's a lot to capture in TPM. The key for us is to innovate. And when we're innovating, I think we're successful. So that's really what matters to us, is bringing new and bold things to this industry.
And there's definitely no shortage of activity. There's something for everyone to participate in. Now, for those who were not able to attend TPM 24, Chris, what was new and what was different at TPM 24 compared with prior TPM gatherings?
Yeah, so much, Noel. I mean, really, we positioned TPM 24 really as a reinvention, and in some respects, not even as a reinvention, but as an entirely new event and conference. Coming out of COVID, the COVID years, we saw the demand for people to get back to in-person events and build on relationships. Renew relationships, form new ones. So we saw the demand for that coming right out of the gates in 2022 when we got back to TPM in person. Fortunately, we were able to capture additional real estate at the Long Beach Convention Center, the exhibition space downstairs, the prime example. We were really in 22 and especially 23, we realized that we were exceeding our footprint with TPM. Anyone who was at TPM 23 could attest to that. Our grand ballroom was standing room only. We probably had 300 people standing in the grand ballroom. People were shoulder to shoulder throughout the convention center. So this year, with the additional space, we had a brand new build out downstairs, used primarily for networking. We built out an entirely new general session room with greater capacity, converted the former grand ballroom into our space for TPM Tech and TPM Cold Chain, both new in different respects for TPM 24. TPM Tech previously had run in the days leading up to the overall TPM conference. TPM Cold Chain was a new satellite event that we launched this year. So yeah, there was entirely new experience around TPM24, and those are just some of the ways that we addressed it.
Well, with everything you just described, Chris, reinvention is a good word to describe it, right? And, I saw firsthand all that you described, and the networking, really continued no matter where you were in that footprint. You guys really did a great job of laying it out this year. So let's talk about the theme. Let's get into content. The theme for TPM 24 was extreme normalization fallout. Very short, but very extreme. Have you ever had a theme this extreme before? And Chris, let's start with you.
I can't honestly say that we have, but I certainly think that that this theme fits with what was going on in the wake of one of the most tumultuous periods, not only in our industry, but in the history of this country and the world. So when we're speaking about normalization, we're looking at it in those terms. We're coming out of a very extreme reality that we all lived through. My dad had one of his favorite sayings was, when people were struggling, when the family was struggling in life, he said his favorite saying was, "Life is a series of minor adjustments." And I think that's really kind of contextualizes what this industry is about, that we're constantly searching for a new normal or adjusting to different factors in the supply chain. Certainly not every adjustment is minor. We're dealing with some severe adjustments throughout the supply chain. On much tighter schedules, they seem to happen more regularly. And that's, I think that's a microcosm of our world. Beyond that, there's a subtext theme to TPM that we rolled out coming out of COVID in 2022, and that is relationships matter.
That's right.
And this industry is built on relationships, and those who separate themselves and are the most successful, it's because of relationships, and that's been true, through the history of our industry. It's never been more true now, and it will be true 10, 25, and 50 years from now. So has there been a theme as extreme as this? Probably not, but I would say that we haven't lived through as an extreme a situation as we did over the last 5 years.
Yeah, well said, Chris. And I'll have to borrow your father's saying. It kind of reminds me of another one that I've heard, that the only constant in life is change, right? And so you need those minor adjustments. So this year's keynote speaker was former Defense Secretary and CIA Director Robert Gates. And it's not every day that you get to hear from someone who advised 8 U.S. presidents. And as anticipated, he had a lot of insight to share on global events and their impact on trade. So I'd like to bring Mark. Mark, what were the key takeaways from Secretary Gates's keynote remarks?
Well, I think a lot of them supported the central theme, which is, we're in some new territory here. In many ways, this industry is cyclical. So the idea that we heard in the morning about overcapacity concerns and where demand, that's very familiar to us. Yet we're in a new environment. And I think we heard that come through not only in terms of the geopolitical side, which was definitely underscored by Dr. Gates, but also in the rethinking in terms of decarbonization. We also heard from some of the economists in terms of changes not only to global economic growth, but possibly even consumption going down the line, looking at much lower rates of container growth. So yeah, his comments came down to the idea that we are in the most geopolitically volatile environment that we've been in 30 years, at least, and how that should be directly on beneficial cargo and their transportation providers' minds. Another thing that really came out, I think, was the danger of cyber risks. Obviously, his comments came on the heels of the Biden administration warning about Chinese-made container cranes, and he was definitely, I thought he was interesting and kind of hinting not so much to the biggest threat of state actors, but non-state actors, kind of underscoring how this is a new factor that throws even more volatility into the situation. And clearly some of those non-state actors have done just that. It would be the Houthi rebels have changed the way shipping happens through Asia to Europe and the U.S. East Coast. And I think he's obviously seen so much, and he was quite, he wasn't going to be led to say when this thing was going to resolve. But there was definitely an indication he gave that this was going to be, this was continuing. And that really there were so many other forces at play here that shipping has just kind of found itself in, that we're kind of at the mercy of much bigger headwinds.
Mm. Thanks for that great recap, Mark. One of the interesting points that the Secretary also made was the emergence of Mexico as a nearshoring hub. Mark, how do you see this potentially reshaping trans-Pacific trade?
It's something we struggle with here because, frankly, there's not really good numbers. We're getting, we're like blind men touching an elephant. We're getting different pieces. We know it's happening. We see the investment in terms of the factories. We see the container volumes increasing from China to Mexico. We see companies like Maersk setting up in Tijuana and capitalizing on the de minimis growth in terms of those smaller value shipments, some of that coming through China and going through Mexico. But it's very hard to understand substantially how much sourcing has shifted. But we know it's happening. Where we aren't seeing it is there's been very, very marginal ocean cross-border services. So it's still primarily a surface game.
You touched on this a little earlier. The economic outlook was presented by S&P's Chris Williamson. Mark, what were the key highlights from his talk? If you could summarize that for the audience.
Frankly, it was a little bit of optimism. I mean, he was coming after upgrading the GDP outlook. So S&P has PMI data, which is a little bit unique than the GDP data that we get from the US Census Bureau because it's far more real time and it doesn't correct itself. So it's nice flashes of exactly what's going on. So the idea is that manufacturing is slowly recovering, but really the growth that we saw in the first quarter was due to fiscal loosening. So that on a container side is pretty positive for the first half, and that's measuring up with what we're hearing from Global Port Tracker, obviously a reflection of National Retail Federation members' appetite. So definitely some positive news. It's, we're in a different state of the rate of growth, but we are expanding.
So speaking of optimism, so far, cargo volumes on the U.S. West Coast are stronger than last year. And here in Long Beach, we expect that to continue. And of course, much of this will depend on the service contracts. TPM is typically a time when shippers and shipping lines start talking about service contracts. So Mark, what are you hearing and what can you tell us about what those service contracts may signal for the rest of the year?
Well, I think, in terms of the East Coast conversations, we're hearing a lot of noise. I mean, obviously there's concerns about, the state of the ILA negotiations, Panama Canal, water restrictions, granted they've loosened up a little bit in the last couple months, and then, persistent longer transits from Suez. So yeah, there is talk about hedging, possibly moving a little bit away. But ultimately for us, it's kind of wait and see. Like we've got the peers data and we're going to see exactly whether the cargo really moves from a coastal side.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be certainly tracking that as well from our end. So let's talk about the industry's quest to decarbonize. There's no shortage of activity on this front. In fact, last summer, the IMO adopted the most aggressive strategy to date to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions from international shipping by or around 2050. And TPM24 featured a session titled Decarbonization Takes Center Stage for BCOs. So Mark, what were some of the key takeaways from that session?
Well, I think we're bumping again to the wall of who's going to pay. The carriers and the rest of the industry are taking on a huge cost. And yes, there may be dribbles of more shippers being willing to pay a little bit more, but it really hasn't hit. And that, I think that concern rippled throughout the whole event. You can look at the amazing ships that are coming out of the shipyard that have alternative fuel propulsion, but at the same time, when it comes to the negotiating table, carriers and shippers are alike are admitting that it's the needle's not moving fast enough. And that's why I thought it was really illuminating on our shipper case study day on Wednesday to hear from Microsoft and even smaller shippers that talked about their practical plans of actually decarbonizing. And it's hard work where you have to balance the larger goal of decarbonization and the practical operation. And it's going to be hard work. And I think that really is what came out of it is, the big ships are coming, but the real work has really begun on the negotiating table.
Well put. And of course, this is going to take all of us working together, right? Rowing in the same direction to get us there. I can tell you that here in Long Beach, we're partnering with ports across the Pacific Ocean on these green shipping corridors just to create that framework so that all of us can be rowing in the same direction. So really appreciate your insight on that. So Mark, taking a step back, based on everything that you heard throughout the TPM24 conference, what observations or what guidance could you offer the BCOs who are listening right now?
Well, I think there's constantly a need to get in front of the carriers more. Chris's theme about the relationship matters is they do matter, but increasingly it can be hard for shippers, particularly smaller shippers, to make those contacts with the people they need to. So that was definitely, we heard that from analysts, is encouraging that. The common thinking here is that, you don't want to be paying too much for the cargo, but you don't want to be paying too little. There's always the constant fear of where capacity might tighten up in the second half. But ultimately, I think it was a far more interesting TPM in the sense of talking about solutions rather than hammering the carriers as in past years about their decisions on ordering or over ordering. And even the Red Sea, I think, kind of was given the proper context in the sense that highly disruptive, but this is an industry moves on. And, we've got a great case of that here with Baltimore. Obviously, major impact, people's lives, negatively affected in terms of fatalities, but also livelihoods. But the supply chain continues.
Yeah. And we're going to get to that in a sec. I want to bring Chris back in. Chris, taking a step back, right? What were the biggest surprises from this year's conference for you?
Yeah. Oh, well, I would say off the top that as organizers, we don't particularly like surprises. Right? We want everything to run smoothly and as planned, and we've certainly seen our share of surprises over the years. I think back to the Teamsters protesting our keynote speaker Bradley Jacobs of XPO Logistics in 2016 throughout the Long Beach Convention Center. I think back to 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine a few days before TPM got underway, and of course the biggest surprise and shock of all of 2020 when we were forced to cancel TPM literally 24 hours before it was going to get underway when the first COVID death was confirmed in the U.S. So those are the kinds of loaded surprises that we've seen in recent years. I think if I approach it, Noel, from the standpoint of an attendee, I think it depends on your perspective. If you're a returning TPM attendee who's experienced a number of TPMs in the past, I think the reinvention of TPM that we talked about earlier certainly had to be a surprise, and I hope that was a pleasant one. If you're a new attendee, all TPM is a surprise because we know how expansive and daunting and intimidating TPM can be, even when you're a veteran. When you're a newcomer, it's just one revelation after another. So thankfully, we didn't have any surprises this year to the downside. I hope the surprises were positive for those who were able to take it in.
Well put, Chris. And of course, having 24 years to look back on gives you that perspective, right? But I do want to get back to something that Mark mentioned earlier. In the weeks that followed TPM24, the Francis Scott Key Bridge at the Port of Baltimore collapsed after being struck by a container ship. And our thoughts and prayers remain with the families of the construction workers who perished. And of course, we stand in solidarity with the Port of Baltimore as it recovers from this tragic accident. Mark, what has been the impact to the U.S. supply chain thus far from this tragic accident?
I would say quite modest. In terms of impact on pricing on the ocean side, really negligible. Baltimore is a key port, obviously for automotive, so it's been more disruptive on the roll-on, roll-off side. But in terms of containers, a lot of that cargo has been diverted to New York and Virginia. Both of those ports have been handling those ships quite well, the first wave of diverted vessels. There were some pinch points in terms of flatbed trucking kind of jumping a little bit in the wake. But ultimately, even the railroads are rerouting and reworking. So, from a impact of the port, huge. Visually huge. In terms of the supply chain, quite modest.
Well, we certainly wish the Port of Baltimore and the Port of Baltimore community all the best as it recovers from this. And I appreciate you sharing that insight. So, Chris, I want to end this incredible session with the two of you with this question. Next year is going to be in fact, it's going to be a huge year, not just a big year. It's going to be a huge year. It'll be TPM's Silver Jubilee. What can you tell us about your vision leading up to TPM 25?
More surprises. It is a landmark year for TPM. It will be 2025, and it will be the 25th edition of TPM. I will say that we have begun some initial discussions around how we want to recognize that. It's not only a landmark year for TPM and the Journal of Commerce and S&P Global, but it's really a reflection of this entire industry and the market that has been on this journey and continues to be on this journey, and we hope that it does continue. I will say there will be some Easter eggs around that celebration, but I think I'll leave it there for now, and hope everybody that we do it justice in when we bring the 25th edition of TPM next March.
I'll leave you with a little crumb. One of the things that we really enjoyed this year was we were able to host the National Shipper Advisory Committee, which advises the Federal Maritime Commission. And that was a public meeting that followed the formal end of TPM. And we're really optimistic of them coming again next year because it's really a nice way to end the event, to hear about all these issues, talk to the folks, and then be able to really get into the weeds and talk about how the industry can move forward via regulation, but also through more just kind of commercial best practices. And I know that we're very optimistic that group will return again this year or next year to continue the work.
That's fantastic, Mark. And Chris, we're going to be looking for those massive Easter eggs at TPM 25. Well, Chris and Mark, thanks again so much for joining me on Supply Chain Insight. You two are normally the ones asking me the questions, so thank you for letting me be the one to ask you the questions today. And that was just an incredible recap of TPM 24. I'm also glad that we got to hear a sneak peek of TPM 25 here first on Supply Chain Insight. So it'll be here before you know it, and we are certainly looking forward to it. To our viewing audience, thank you again for joining us. We'll see you again soon for another episode of Supply Chain Insight, brought to you by the Port of Choice, the Port of Long Beach.